So, in this presentation we will be looking into the concept of species and the different types of species, subdivisions of species actually. So, what is a species? Species is a group of closely similar organisms that can interbreed with each other and produce fertile offsprings. We can say that the species includes potentially interbreeding populations that are reproductively isolated from other groups. Okay. Actually, this particular definition was put forward by Ernst Mayr in the year 1942, and this is considered to be the biological species concept. Okay. The definition is somewhat unrealistic, and there had been plenty of taxonomists, evolutionists, and even geneticists who had come up to explain or define the concept of species. And accordingly, there are various concepts on species, and among that the two species concepts, morphological species concept and biological species concept, are the ones which you are supposed to learn as per your syllabus. Morphological species concept is otherwise known as phenetic species concept, and it is based entirely on the morphological characters. Okay, as the name suggests, it is about the morphological characters, and according to this, species is a population or group of individuals in a population which differ morphologically from other such populations, right. So, a species is defined on the basis of observed morphological similarities and differences, and species was defined by Cronquist in 1988 as the smallest groups that are consistently and persistently distinct and distinguishable by ordinary means. Okay. So, here the most the emphasis is mainly on the morphological features, but here at the same time it also takes into account phenetic characters like chromosome number, then habitats, chromosome morphology, etc. But the major emphasis is on the morphological features. Okay. The second major concept is the biological concept or biological species concept. Biological species concept was put forward by Mayr in 1942, and this concept holds that species are groups of actually and potentially interbreeding natural populations which are reproductively isolated from other such groups. So, here groups of interbreeding natural populations, that is the first point which we have to stress. Secondly, these the populations are actually reproductively isolated from other such groups. So, according to this, species are absolute realities and typified by individuals. The major proponents of biological species concept are Mayr, Dobzhansky, and Jordan. And this biological species forms a reproductive community that is isolated from other such communities or other such groups, an ecological community or ecological unit, and a genetic unit. Okay. A species may be regarded as a reproductive community as its members recognize each other as potential mates for reproduction and propagation, and it is considered as an ecological unit as it forms a constituent of a biological community, or what we call as an ecological community, and interacts with other components in a community. Okay, that is an ecological concept, right. Then species, it is a part of the genetic community as it consists of a closed and protected gene pool. Okay, since a population, species is a population which is completely reproductively isolated from other such populations, what happens is this particular group has its own gene pool which is distinct from other such populations, right. So, the gene pool is closed and hence it is considered to be a genetic unit. Why it is an ecological unit? Because with respect from the perspective of ecology, it is a part of the community, and as the populations, they interact with each other in a community. Okay. So, these are the different concepts under biological species concept, but there are several shortcomings as well. Biological species concept holds only for sexually reproducing organisms, isn't it? Because here we are saying that potentially interbreeding natural populations can only form biological species. But so what about other populations which doesn't interbreed? Okay, so there what happens is a species cannot be recognized in such cases, and it does not take into account the evolutionary history of like sexuality starting from primitive ancestors to the present day forms. Biological species concept does not consider the evolutionary continuity. Okay, so again there is a like a limitation for the biological species concept defining the concept of species. Fine. So these are the two major species concepts. Right. Now we can see the characteristics of species. Okay. Yeah. Before going into that, we missed this too, isn't it? So, as per Mayer's definition on biological species, a species is never a fixed entity, but it is always a dynamic unit capable of change and modifications, right? It also says that there is reproductive isolation. It is the main barrier. So, reproductive isolation, it prevents interbreeding and gene exchange between populations, isn't it? So, it is a main barrier that isolates one species from the other such species. Okay. As a result, transitional forms between species are usually absent naturally. Okay, that is, hybrids between species are not doesn't occur naturally. Okay, it is very rare. Fine. Now, general characteristic features of a species. As a basic unit of classification and evolution, the species possess the following characters. Okay, the first one being possession of distinctive morphological characters. Obviously, each species do have distinctive morphological characters. You have been learning about the diversity. You have been learning on different taxon, like different phyla, different classes in your first year and second year class degree classes, isn't it? At that time we had been stressing on the morphological characters. So we have been seeing, you are already familiar with the morphological characters of each species or each taxon, isn't it? So each species possesses distinctive morphological characters with which it can be identified. Okay, and there is reproductive isolation. Okay, it is a species is reproductively isolated from other such group of species. Okay, then absence of intermediate and transitional forms. Already said that there is very less possibility of having a hybrid between two species. So a transitional or intermediate forms are absent. Then closely allied species have separate but adjoining territories. Usually species having similar morphological characters or similar very closely related species usually have they have separate territories, but they may be having adjoining territories. So some of the environmental conditions may be similar in both of the for both of the species. Okay, the members of a species, they share a common gene pool. Obviously, like as a genetic unit, it is having similar gene pool. Okay, then members of the same species, they interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Then interbreeding between members of different species results in sterile offsprings, and new species arise from pre-existing species by gradual change. Okay, so these are the characteristic features of a species. So a species, the members of a species usually follow all these features. Okay, now what are the subdivisions of a species? So yeah, so the first one being subspecies. A subspecies, it is defined as geographically isolated populations of a species capable of interbreeding and producing fertile offspring. So each species is formed of two or more such geographically isolated populations. So there is two reproductive, actually between these populations, geographically isolated populations, there needn't be reproductive isolation. I hope it is clear. Just imagine a species as having a population on either side of a hillock, a mountain. Okay, so what happens is, since there is a mountain in between the members of the what you call two populations, even though it belongs to the same species, it may not be able to interbreed, isn't it, because of the geographic isolation, right. But what happens is, when they come together, they can interbreed. Okay. Such kind of populations are known as subspecies. So, geographically isolated populations of the same species, they are capable of interbreeding and they can produce fertile offsprings, but unfortunately they cannot interbreed just because these two populations are geographically isolated. If there is a large river or an ocean and two populations of the same species getting separated, they cannot interbreed because of that isolation or because of the barrier. Okay. So, those two populations are considered to be the subspecies. Right. So, the morphological differences between the subspecies are so slight that it may go actually undetected. Okay. However, when they accumulate more and more, structural and genetic differences also becomes obvious. So, a stage is reached when these two populations are no longer capable of interbreeding. Because of these accumulated differences or changes, it may become different genotypes, and they may not be able to interbreed naturally. Okay. So, that is a what you call as a subspecies. Okay. Such reproductively isolated groups are then considered as a separate species. Thus, a subspecies represents a stage in the evolution of a species. Okay. I hope it is clear, right. So, it is geographically isolated population of a species which are capable of interbreeding and producing offsprings, but unfortunately because of the geographic isolation they are no longer able to. Okay. Now, next subdivision is known as a semispecies. Semispecies, it is considered to be a population showing some of the characteristic features of species and some of the subspecies. Again, this concept was introduced by Mayer in 1970, and actually he gave this particular definition. Mayer gave this particular definition, and we can see that Drosophila polystorum is a complex of 6 semispecies. Okay. According to Grant, semispecies are populations that are neither good races nor good species, but are connected by a reduced amount of interbreeding and gene flow. So, it is not completely separated, they can interbreed to slight extent. So, such borderline species are bound to exist if the process of species formation is gradual rather than instantaneous. Okay. So, what happens is, as per the gradualism, we have already in one of the previous presentation we saw that a species may evolve into another species, and during this particular evolutionary process there can be plenty of transitional stages or intermediate stages. Okay. And these intermediate stages may not be completely distinct species from the ancestor. Instead, the transitional stages may show some of the characters some characters different from the ancestor. Okay. And there may be slight amount of interbreeding happening in reduced amount of interbreeding happening between the ancestor and the transitional stages. Okay. One of the such borderline species are supposed to be called as semispecies. Okay. Morphological characters may not be so much profound, but you can see that it is not completely subspecies, or it may not be called as a complete species. So, such species are referred as a semispecies. Okay. Now, sibling species, they are sympatric species. Sympatric species or sympatric population means those which are living in the same geographical area. They are not they are not geographically isolated, but they live in the same area, right. So, sympatric species that are morphologically similar but reproductively isolated. So, it is almost different from subspecies. In sibling species, two populations are there of the same, maybe just imagine it is species. Okay. Two populations. Okay. And these two populations of the same species live in the same area, but no interbreeding can happen between these two species. So, they are reproductively isolated, but morphologically they are very similar. and hence unless we study the biology part of the species, we may not be able to understand that they are two different sibling species. Okay. I hope it is clear. There are about 6 species of Anopheles maculipennis and its relatives. So, this is a group of 6 species which are so much alike in their adult morphological features, but their larvae and eggs are different from each other. The adult species are isolated from mating partly by differences in mating behavior and partly by hybrid sterility. That is, one is because they cannot the reproductive isolation, it is because of differences in the mating behavior. Because of the differences in mating behavior between the sibling species, they cannot interbreed. Okay. One is reproductive isolation is because of the differences in mating behavior. Secondly, what happens is the younger ones formed, they are not viable, that is they are not fertile. Okay. So, it is hybrid. Sterility is also one of the reasons for reproductive isolation. Okay. So, sibling species are also common in Drosophila and in all groups of animals, for example, certain flycatchers among birds, white fishes of North America, etc. Then sibling species are important in the process of speciation and also confirm the validity of the biological species concept. I hope it is clear. Sibling species. Okay. So, subspecies was like interbreeding groups, but geographically isolated. Sibling species is reproductively isolated, but they are living in the same geographical area. Sympatric means living in the same geographical area. Okay. Now, the next subdivision, it is Cline and Deme. Okay. When we speak about Cline, it is a group of local population of a widely distributed species which exhibit regular and gradual variation from one part of their geographic range to another. Okay. And this particular concept was put forward by Julian Huxley, the concept of Cline, and a very good example is that from what you call the common zebra. Okay. So, Cline they exhibit continuous variation in their morphological features. In the case of common zebra, we can see they usually inhabit the southern half of Africa, and you can say that we can observe that there is a steady decrease in the what you call so you can in the case of a common zebra, that there is a range of like this one is found, black striping of the leg. Okay. The black stripes on the leg, it shows a steady decrease in a progressive series from north to south. Okay. So, when we study the zebra populations from north to the south of southern half of Africa, we can see that the black stripes on the leg, it decreases as we move from north to south. Okay. So, such character gradient is what is referred as a cline. Here the traits involved usually have adaptive value for the organism. Okay. And here we cannot say that these are completely what you call reproductively isolated as well. Okay. Needn't be. Okay. The next subdivision of species is Deme. Deme is a group of potentially interbreeding individuals of a local population sharing a common gene pool. Okay. And it can be considered as the smallest population units, which are the groups of genetically similar individuals bearing an intimate temporal and spatial relation to one another, and each deme is isolated to some extent from adjacent demes, but there is always the possibility of genetic exchange between them, that is interbreeding is possible, and even distantly located demes may contribute genetic material to one another over a period of time by the gradual passage of certain genotypes from one deme to another. So, demes are open genetic systems that are affected by gene flow from adjacent populations. Okay. So, a deme for example is as defined by Dobzhansky, it is a Mendelian population, and for example carp in a pond, paramecium in a ditch. So, it is a local population, right. So, there is potentially interbreeding individuals in a local population, and obviously they share a common gene pool. right. So, such kind of populations are considered as Deme, and it represents a more or less genetically isolated unit of a population, right. So, individuals of each Deme resemble one another very closely, and the differences are too slight to be distinguished, and the genetic constitution of a Deme is the sum total of all the different genes it contains. So, Deme is actually a very smaller group in a local area. Okay. So, we saw subspecies, semispecies, sibling species, Cline and Deme, right. So, these are the different subdivisions of species. We saw the two species concepts, biological and morphological. Okay, fine. Thank you.